A federal judge in the state of Texas has issued a ruling that, in effect, if it stands, would ban the abortion pill, the abortion drug mifepristone. Completely absurd ruling. We'll get to some legal analysis in a second here. This drug, mifepristone, was approved by the FDA 23 years ago. And now this federal judge is trying to overturn that, prevent women from having access to it. Take a look from ABC News. In his April 7th decision, Judge Matthew Kaczmarek of the Northern District of Texas ruled in favor of Alliance Defending Freedom, a conservative Christian legal advocacy group that asked him to reverse the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's approval of mifepristone, an oral medication typically taken with misoprostol to end a pregnancy. The advocacy group's lawsuit said mifepristone is unsafe and that the FDA didn't study it closely enough before approving its use. The FDA and mainstream medical doctors insist this isn't true and that there have been no safety concerns during the 23 years the drug has been on the market. And then, as I referenced, here is a former U.S. attorney responding to this news on MSNBC.
All that being said, right, when you have this ruling, is there any merit behind this Texas judge's ruling when you look at mifepristone, which has been on the market, as Dasha said, for more than 2 decades, taken by 5 million women across the country? Is there any merit to this decision by the judge?
No. Most of the time when there's a legal decision, I'll say, well, you know, it's a close call or reasonable minds could disagree. No, absolutely not. The FDA is the government agency that is empowered to make decisions about whether drugs should be permitted on the market. For a judge 23 years later to go back and second guess and say they got it wrong and I am overruling their decision is legally wrong, and it's terrible public policy. Imagine you're a drug manufacturer. Once you get FDA approval, you should be able to invest in this drug and market this drug and everybody who wants to sell this drug. If a judge at any point down the road could reverse the decision of the FDA, it throws the whole pharmaceutical industry out of whack. It creates chaos for consumers. And if you look at the language, what the judge says here, what he says is what they failed to adequately test was the emotional trauma that is suffered by women who undergo medical abortions when they see their unborn child. You know, there's certainly no agreement as to that language is just so loaded. No agreement whether a fetus is a child under various religious traditions and other things. So I think this case ultimately, in a normal world, I would say this case will be reversed. But of course, we're in the Fifth Circuit, which is also quite conservative. And then we go to the Supreme Court, which gave us Dobbs. And so I don't have the confidence I would have had pre-Dobbs that this is just not going to stand at the appellate court level.
So hopefully a higher court will reverse this ruling. But as she noted, especially after the Trump administration, the judicial system has slid to the right significantly. So it could stand. And because of, let's just be honest, the personal views on abortion of this one judge deciding he's going to reach into the job of the FDA and say, no, it's not safe. You guys were wrong. I'm going to make that decision. Because of that, we could see significant negative ramifications for so many millions of women. And again, I say hopefully it will be reversed. But this is, before we move on to the next aspect of this story, a chance to remind everyone, and hopefully my entire audience agrees with this, but I must remind you guys, this is yet another example of how important it is to mobilize not just your own, making sure your own vote is cast for the correct candidate, but also doing what we can within the context of our own lives to mobilize others to show up to the polls in as many elections as we can, because it has such significant outcomes. And I see, again, I hope anyone watching my show doesn't buy into this, but I see a sentiment from time to time on the left of kind of electoral politics doesn't work. And because of the absolutely true realization and recognition of the failings of the government generally, elected leaders generally on so many issues, and even the Democratic Party, their failures, Because of that, we should detach. That's just not the way we have to go forward. Yes, we have to continue to make sure and do what we can to get the best Democrats as the nominee. But even when the nominee in these different elections isn't the one we would have chosen, or we have a lot of issues with them, we have to still make sure we do the work and mobilize, because so much of the current reality of our judicial landscape was shaped by the fact that Trump won in 2016. This judge being appointed by Trump, and the justices, the Supreme Court justices, and so many federal judges, it matters and it has an impact. So as I said, let's keep trying to get better Democrats as the nominees. And in the meantime, still make sure the Republican doesn't win, because then we get disastrous outcomes such as this. Last thing we'll look at on this, Democratic Senator Ron Wyden responded saying this, quote, "There's no way this decision has a basis in law. It is instead rooted in conservatives' dangerous and undemocratic takeover of our country's institutions. No matter what happens in 7 days, I believe the Food and Drug Administration has the authority to ignore this ruling, which is why I'm again calling on President Biden and the FDA to do just that. The FDA, doctors, and pharmacies can and must go about their jobs like nothing has changed and keep mifepristone accessible to women across America. If they don't, the consequences of banning the most common method of abortion in every single state will be devastating." So there, Ron Wyden saying this ruling is so absurd, he's calling on the Biden administration, specifically the FDA, to ignore the ruling. What a moment we're in. And this, as I said, again highlights the importance of taking as serious as we possibly can, as seriously as we possibly can, the effect of these elections. Elections really do have consequences, as you guys know. Make sure you're following me on Instagram, Luke Beasley Official.